Hello everyone, welcome to IMPRINT IS. I'm Varun Khuller, and today we are looking at chapter number 7, that is the consolidation of India as a nation, and we'll be looking at the official language problem, right? And we'll be looking at what all the government has done to basically increase the strength and the extent of the coverage of the Hindi language, right? We have recently started a Telegram group. Please join that. Just search by IMPRINT IS in the Telegram, right? And or you can actually go through the link we have posted here, right? Okay, so let's start. Now, as we always do, we will first be revising the previous chapter, that is the initial years, through our class notes, right? So we're looking at the chapter that is the initial years, and the main problem was obviously, in the chapter what we discussed was what are the threats and the problems that we basically will be facing when India gets independent. Remember that on 15th August, the first day of freedom was celebrated with much exuberance and with elation, right? And the idea became that sacrifices of generations of patriots, the blood of countless martyrs had borne fruit. So that was the basic. So it was obviously a time for celebration and something, right? But it was actually marred by a few problems that we had at the same time, right? And what were those problems? Um, we had to basically focus on the territorial and administrative integration of the princely states, right? There was communal riots, which accompanied partition. There was rehabilitation of nearly 6 million refugees. So this was again very important. Then there was a need to avoid war with Pakistan. This was basically on the Kashmir issue, right? Because they had already invaded Kashmir. Then there was communist insurgency. The communists wanted to go through a full-scale war for whole-scale socialism of India, right? Uh, then what were the medium-term problems? Now, in the medium-term problems, we have the problem of framing of the constitution, right? And in that itself, the official language problem or the Hindi problem, was the major problem, I would say, right? Then organizing elections, and we'll talk about this in the chapter, right? From India after Gandhi, from Ramchandra Guha, so because it's better covered there. Then abolishing the semi-feudal agrarian order. Yes, this land reforms chapter will be covering from this book itself, right? So stay tuned for that. Then we have the long-term tasks, that is promoting national integration, and we will be talking about this a bit today. And then pushing forward the process of nation in the making, right? Facilitating a rapid economic development, so basically planning and trickle down theory, what method is good. Then removing endemic poverty, this basically, the Garibi Hatao or Sabka Saath Sabka Vikas, right? And still going on. Then we wanted to initiate the planning process that, if there's planning, what will happen is that now, there will be a very clear idea that, that what should be done. There's a very famous public administration author. He used to talk about Urvik and Gulaki. They both used to talk about the fact that lack of a plan is cruel, right? Uh, then, uh, then we have to get rid of centuries of social injustice, inequality, and oppression. Now, this is something that has gone on the back burner and still is a problem, right? The Dalit issue is a problem right now. Dalit lynching in India is still an issue. Then we have the Sabrimala case and women, right? And we also have the hashtag Me Too thing. And these are like the issues still going on, right? And then obviously to evolve a foreign policy. And we will talk about this in much more detail, right? There'll be a proper lecture on this. Okay, then what are the positive features, right? So the most important positive feature was the outstanding leadership that we had at that time. They had tremendous dedication and idealism. And they were basically a presence of a strong nationwide Congress. Despite the fact they were very, very, obviously popular, they basically ran a democratic administrative and political system, right? They had experience of actually organizing a mass movement. They built up a political party and they participated in the colonial legislature for decades. So all these 3 points go in their favor, right? So, obviously we had something which made sure that India exists and is not actually broken into pieces, the balkanization of India. So why was that? Why was India not balkanized? They possessed a great deal of talent in consensus building, right? The leader of independent India were persons of total personal integrity and an austere lifestyle. They didn't actually take care of their own families sometimes, right? And Indira Gandhi would actually criticize Nehru for that. They shared a common vision of independent India, right? So these were the basic foundation cruxes that yes, India has good people, a good human resources definitely, right? Maybe not the most skilled, but very good. Another positive features of India situation was the existence of a Congress, a strong democratic nationwide party with an established leadership with deep roots and support. There was very strong support for the Congress in India, right? And this was seen in the 1952 elections. Uh, so normally you'll with this we'll start the session of Prince Late. But before that, what the kind of question you'll get? The question which is expected in UPSC in post independence, or maybe they just give it in GS2, is the fact that why has India remained democratic despite the fact that we, Indians, other countries like Pakistan and other developing countries, have not. That is the standard question. I am expecting that for a very long time. I would say that it should come in the next year or so. Okay, then we have the accession of princely states. Okay, and unifying the port partition India and the princely states under one administration was perhaps the most important task facing the political leadership. The colonial India was nearly 40% of the territory and was occupied by 565 small and large states ruled by the princes. So this is something that you should commit to memory. Then the Indian nationalists could hardly accept a situation in which unity of India would be endangered by hundreds of princely states, right? So Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel also mentioned to VK Menon that we might lose whatever we have gained if this is not done, right? Then nationalist leaders in India and the states rejected any claim for state for independence, and they only gave the option of joining India or Pakistan to them. And with great skill and diplomacy, both persuasion and pressure, right? We had one of the great leaders, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, who succeeded in integrating thousands and hundreds of princely states. As it turned out, only three states gave trouble after, 15 August, right? And three before that. Okay, so let's talk about the three. So before 15th August, before 15th of August, 1947, uh, we had Travancore, and it was the first state to question the right of the Congress to succeed the Britishers at the paramount power. The most important idea was that Travancore was strategically placed at the southernmost tip of the subcontinent, and it had the most highly educated populace. It had a basically thriving maritime trade. It discovered reserves of monazite, so even the Britishers were more than happy to keep it independent and maybe get access to that. The Diwan of Travancore, C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, was actually the main leader, and he wielded the power. The Maharaja and the Maharani were like puppets in his hand, and he declared that Travancore would become an independent unit, right? And its bid for independence was obviously welcomed and encouraged by Jinnah as well. In July 1946, he met Mountbatten and reaffirmed his choice and declared that he would prefer to negotiate a treaty with India itself. But what happened was when he returned to Travancore, he was brutally attacked by assassins belonging to the Kerala Socialist Party, and the consequences were immediate. The state's people organization turned the heat, and Travancore immediately gave in. Okay, so this again would be something that you should. This sequence of events, if you can remember in your answer, that would really help. Okay. A question is expected on a session of princely states has none come till now, so that's again something you should prepare. Then Bhopal. Now Bhopal again, the Nawab of Bhopal was basically the chancellor of the Chamber of Princes, right? And he was close to the Muslim League, and he was even thinking that maybe he should go with Pakistan. But the idea, because he had mostly Hindu population, right? So in time, he basically, on his advice, right, of his old friend Mountbatten, and the tide of increasing accession by other fellow princes, he was basically convinced that yeah, he should accede to the Indian Union. Then we have Jodhpur. This was much more trickier because Hanwant Singh was antipathetic to the Congress and did not see much of his future in India. But he was still a Hindu king with a Hindu population, right? Along with rule of Jaisalmer, he entered into negotiation with Jinnah, who offered Jodhpur full port facilities in Karachi, unrestricted imports of arms, supply of grain from Sindh, right? So Jinnah was offering good terms to them. Remember, at the same time when this is happening, Jinnah is also negotiating with them. Came Panikkar, got news wind of the plan and asked Patel to intervene that if you let Jinnah do it, it will just become another problem for us. So Patel contacted Jodhpur, sorry, and promised free imports of arms as well as adequate training. Meanwhile, his own headmen and village nobles basically told the Maharaja that he could not really expect them to be at ease in a Muslim state. So that was basically the crux. Also, the ruler of adjoining Jaisalmer asked him on whose side he will be if riots are there between Hindus and Muslims. So finally, the Maharaja of Jodhpur came around, right? So the south. Then we have Junagadh. Right, again, this was much more complicated because the Nawab announced his accession to Pakistan on 15 August, right? Even though his population was majority Hindu, right? So Junagadh was a small state on the coast of Saurashtra, right, without any contiguity with Pakistan, but it was not that far off. So the people did not really accept the ruler's decision. They organized a popular movement, and the Nawab fled to, you know, Pakistan, right? And they established a provincial government. The Diwan of Junagadh, right, uh, decided to invite the government of India to intervene. And finally, a plebiscite was done in February 1948, and then they joined India. So that was very interesting. Then we have Hyderabad. It was one of the largest population, and it was a primarily Muslim state. Nizam thought that maybe they can continue being an independent state, right? As it was in pre-independence India. He was also encouraged by Pakistan, but what he did was he signed a standstill agreement with the government of India, right? While negotiation proceeded, right, which would introduce representative government. This happened in November 1947. Nizam basically had other plans, and he basically allowed the rapid growth of Ittihad ul Muslimin, right, and the paramilitary wing, the Razakars. And this outfit was led by Qasim Rizvi, and this basically, there was a lot of communal violence, right, and there was a lot of forced conversions during this time. Uh, Initially, the Hyderabad State Congress launched a powerful Satyagraha movement to force democratization, but thousands of people, had to flee the state because the repression happened by the Raskars and the state authorities. Finally, there was a powerful communist-led peasant struggle developed in the Telangana region, right? And peasant alums basically organized defense of the people against Raskars and big landlords. And finally, what happened was the Nizam continued to drag his feet, and import of more and more arms, right, happened. But finally, the Indian Army moved into Hyderabad on 13th of February. This is an important date, you should remember this for your exam. And Nizam surrendered after 3 days. So this was the second state which was troublesome for us, right? Then the finally the state. Okay. In case you don't know, this movement into Hyderabad with India is known as Operation Polo. This might be asked as an objective question. Okay. Then we have Kashmir, the state of accession, which because this issue is one of the biggest, right? And we're still having the same problem. The problem was that it was a Hindu king ruling a Muslim population, right? And then there was the accident of geography that Kashmir and is both contiguous to India and Pakistan. Initially, Hari Singh did not accede to India or Pakistan. He basically feared democracy in India and communism in Pakistan, and he hoped that he wanted to stay out of both, right? But obviously, that's not going to happen, right? So, popular political forces led by National Conference and his leader Sheikh Abdullah led to complete transference of power, right? And in time, onset of winter, what happened was, very strategically, what Pakistan did was that several Pakistan, military personnel with Pathan tribesmen invaded Kashmir, right? And the ill-trained army of the Maharaja obviously was no match for it, and he on 24th of October appealed to India for military assistance. Now Mountbatten said that this cannot happen until you accede to India, right? Because he was still the Governor General of India. Remember that at that time. So the Maharaja acceded to India and also agreed to install Sheikh Abdullah as the head of state. And obviously Indians was basically prepared to push back the raiders. But the problem became it was winters already. It was not easy to fight a war. Okay, right. Remember this. And then Mountbatten suggested that the violence had come from the Pakistani raiders, right? And Jinnah said that this was because of the ill treatment of Muslims in the Poonch area, right? So Jinnah even offered that if you give up Kashmir, we will give up Junagadh, right? The disputed claim, right? And this was during the phase that the dispute of Junagadh was happening. In Kashmir, Indian army captured Baramulla, Uri, etc., and formed a protective ring around Srinagar. Then, Nehru basically thought that maybe there were four methods which can, this Kashmir issue can be solved. He said there could be a plebiscite, and they could join whichever way they want. We can have independent state with the defense guaranteed by India and Pakistan. I think this is a good idea. But anyhow, then he said that maybe the third option was maybe Jammu going to India and the rest of the state going to Pakistan. And the fourth is Jammu and the Valley staying with India, which is the current case, and the beyond Punj and beyond Siri to Pakistan. So this was the option basically Nehru was thinking, right? Other leaders basically had different views. Sardar Patel was actually, he didn't even want Kashmir. Anyhow, finally what happened was that because it was winters, what could we do? So government of India agreed on 30th December 1947 that to refer the Kashmir problem to the United States Security Council. Now, this was a very odd thing to do, but I think in winters, what else can you do? Maybe, he could have just stuck his guns, didn't do anything. But the idea became that this became the biggest issue. Because remember that Britain has very strategic interest in Pakistan. Because that Kashmir is a part where, the British Commonwealth touches the Soviet Union. So, remember it was the starting of the Cold War, right? It was the us against them, that Britain and US versus the Russia. So this basically became obviously not great for India there, and it went against India. And what happened was that with the hangover of the partition era, Congress was always opposed by the British in the Parliament as well, and the UN. So what happened was that the Kashmir issue, the Jammu and Kashmir issue, was changed to the India and Pakistan issue, and the UN discussions were partisans. Basically, it was a idea that all Britain and US did was help the Pakistanis. So in time, a UN resolution was passed that the referendum should be done under UN separation supervision after Pakistan had withdrawn its troops, but it didn't really work out. And what happened was the resolution remains in practice. Okay. And what basically became is that we have now an uncompromising struggle, a struggle of two ways of life, of two ways of political organization, the scale of values to spiritual attitudes. Okay, so it was not just a battle of territory. Now it became, Kashmir became the symbol of, secularism in India, and obviously it became the symbol of nationalism in Pakistan, and still is, right? Okay, so this was about the revision of the accession of princely states chapter, right? And let's stop here. Now, there was another two things which happened later on. That was Goa and you know Pondicherry, right? And this happened a lot later. Pondicherry was given up in 1954, right? And Goa in 61. I think there's something wrong with 61. Okay, so this was again, but this was with different French governments. French were more than happy to give up Pondicherry easily, but Portuguese weren't. They wanted an base in the Indian Ocean, so and they also have lived in Goa for a very long time. So, but what happened was there was a local movement, and finally Indian troops also marched into Goa. So the Governor General of Goa surrendered, and Goa became a part of India in 61. So let's continue, right? And now we are doing a chapter number 7, Consolidation of India as a nation, right? So one of the biggest problems that India has faced, maybe the most serious one, has been of national unity or consolidation of the nation, right? So okay, accession of princely states happened, but they're still not actually Indian. They're actually, the people of that states, those states actually never have an Indian consciousness in some ways, right? Remember, the movement, the nationalist movement, was not that strong before 1930s in those areas. So what basically when we think about India is that we think about unity and diversity. Remember India, right? So remember, the Indian nation is a product of the historical process and has been, right, therefore in the making for a very long at least some 5 centuries. Okay, uh, remember the fact that despite its cultural diversity, there are certain common trends, basically common cultural heritage that has developed, which has knit the Indian people together, giving them a sense of oneness. Maybe the basic idea being belonging to the same subcontinent. Even inculcating a spirit of tolerance of diversity and dissent, right? Very interestingly, if you think about it, if you think about the partition, Muslims said that Muslims said that many Hindus don't eat with them, right? And despite the fact that, Muslim for a Muslim to share even his plate is not a big deal, right? On the what they didn't realize was that Hindus didn't eat with other Hindus as well. So there was a tolerance of the diversity and dissent. Then Rabindranath Tagore put that the unity of India, right, is the unity of spirit. The elements of political, administrative, and economic unity developed under the Mughals basically was now entrenched by the Britishers. That was what happened. The feeling of Indianness, however vague, had come into being, and it was typically testified by the currency of concepts of Bharatavarsha and Hindustan. As we talked about earlier in an earlier chapter, that the colonization of the Indian economy, the society, and the polity, it strengthened the process of India's unification. Right, Indians basically had common economic interest and political interest. Remember, right, and they had more and more cultural and social development. Though we had different ethnicity and language. So that's an interesting thing about India. We have common economic and political interest, cultural and social development, but we are differentiated by language and ethnicity. Right? We were politically and emotionally woven into the nation by the national movement itself. Right? And remember, the national movement realized that the making of this nation was a continuous process and will be open to disruptions, interruptions, challenges, and there will even be reversal of this. Right? Uh, Nehru basically said in 1952 that the most important overriding factor in India is the unity of India. So let's try to understand that in 1947 onwards, the major challenge of India was the unity, right? He felt in 1957 even that the biggest challenge, or the biggest task, is not only the development of India as a whole, but even more the psychological and emotional integration of the people of India, right? That we have to feel Indian, right? Despite the fact we are Punjabis, or we are Tamilians, or we are Keralites, or we are from Kannada, right? That's India's complex diversity is legend. Remember the fact that we consist of large number of linguistic, cultural, and geographical zones. It has large followers of Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Parsis, etc. In 1950, India recognized 14 major languages. Now this has actually turned into 22, right? Besides millions of others, right? And 1961 census listed 1500 plus languages as mother tongue. And remember, tribal languages are also there, which are even not listed. The cultural identity, in India could not develop, right, in conflict with the all India national identity, right? Nehru talked about his approach to this, that what would be approach of the national integration. We have to remember always that India is a country with variety of cultures, habits, and customs and ways of life. It is very necessary to, I think, for all of us to remember that wonderful country of all ours has infinite variety, and there is absolutely no reason why we should try to regiment it after a single battle. Okay, so India is far greater, far richer, and far varied than any part of it. Now, if you talk about this, while I was studying in Calcutta, right, there were a lot of exchange students. So there was this friend of mine. She was from France, and when she was traveling across India, she was asking me that why is it so different from the other place. So I said that India is not just one country. You can think of India as the whole of Europe integrated into one country, right? Every country has every state has a different culture, different language, different food habits, right? India has a lot of diversity, but all of them kind of give us the national identity as well. Right? I think we don't think that language and food, or any other religion makes us different from one another, right? We have developed an outlook and embraced all varieties and consider it our very own, right? Uh, we never think that Salman Khan is a Muslim hero. At the end of the day, we have accepted him as our own, right? But on the other hand, all the leaders recognize the fact that the diversity of India could be a source of weakness. Diversity could be used for divisive purposes, transformed into disruptive tendencies. There could be communalism, there could be casteism, there could be linguistic and regional exclusiveness. Then finally, with all this, the issue which is linked is the issue of jobs, educational opportunities, access to political power, and share in the large economic cake, right? Could fuel rivalries and conflicts based on religion, caste, and language. And this has happened, right? We have a linguistic movement, we have a caste movement, we have regional inclusive movement. Even recently, the Marathas being given a quota, I think, has come in the newspaper recently, right? The broad strategy for consolidation, after 1947, has involved territorial integration, which has happened, which in the cession of states. Then, obviously, with the division of state reorganization committee of 1956, right, the act basically divided various states into various parts. Then there's mobilization of political and institutional resources. There's economic development, the adoption of policies which would promote social justice, and removing, clearing inequalities and providing equal opportunities, nationalization of banks, removal of private purses are examples for that. Uh, what Nehru also warned all the future countrymen that any reversal of democratic methods might lead to disruption and violence. And he said that India could only be held together by a democratic structure. With the common man should feel that he's a part of the country, and then only India can remain India, right? Because that this democratic structure would provide freedom to the diverse economic, cultural, and political voices to express themselves, right? Very interestingly, if you think about it, Congress was very very good at it, right? It, despite the fact political parties like the Socialist Party, Communist Party of India, the Jan Sangh, and the Swatantra Party, right, had different ideologies. They also basically stood for the unity of India. So, right, it was not just the Congress, but even the opposition parties, which played a very important role in the integration of India. Uh, Remember the fact that it's not just the political parties, even the Kisan Sabhas, the Federation Commerce of right, they also basically saw that this loyalty to a class or class organization was not a threat to national cohesion. Right? Uh, and the most interesting part was the fact that what Gandhi talked about, during after his travels in India. He said that every part of India is mine. Okay, that he cannot be associated with one region, language, religion, or caste, right? Despite Gandhi having his ashram in Sabarmati and in Wardha, right? He traveled all across India very regularly. So he, even Jawahar Nehru, Sardar Patel, Maulana Azad, Rajendra Prasad could not be associated with one region, one language, or caste. The most interesting asset of the Congress person in comparison to the others, the reason why they have the Congress party ruled over India for a very long time, was the fact they were well versed in accommodative politics. It has been able to unite the diverse political and ideological trends during the anti-imperialist struggle, and they were able to do this even after the right. The most interesting example is Nehru was willing to persuade and accommodate the communist. Once they gave up their recourse to violence and joined the this political discourse of the country, right? And they even participated and were the second largest party in the 1952 elections. Then we have the Indian Army and the Administrative Service. They are a force for forging in national unity. I would say that if there's one element of India which basically enforces nationalism, is in the all India character and of the services that right. The Indian Forest Services, the in central services, the basic right, the IRS, the other services as well, right, the IPS, the IAS, etc. Right. So these services basically have helped in basically holding India to a large extent. Then a lot of ways which maybe in this chapter also that has not talked about, the Indian economy actually is the major reason of the integration of India. There's national market, there's transport, there's communication network, which were unified after 1947. It was the large scale development which was there: steel factories, fertilizer plants, cement factories, etc. So like coal from Jharkhand and Bihar was being used in Bombay, it will be used in Punjab. So that kind of makes these places symbols of national endeavor as well as national unity. So I would say that, in some ways has, one of the strongest forces of, cultural assimilation and, national unity are these large scale industries which happened after independence. The other thing also was at the IITs and IIMs. So being I started at both of them. So if you think about them, what these Indian institutes, all of them, right? Whether it's Indian Institute of Science, whether it is IITs, or whether any national institute, what happens there is that people from all parts of the country are there. There's very little quota for the local people. So what happens is that those places become a symbol of India itself, and now you have friends from Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu. You are a Punjabi, and you have your friends with Kashmir. You have friends with Northeast. You have all these things. So these basically create an all India perspective to the person who's actually studying in these colleges, right? And you'll have a roommate who's a Marathi, you'll have a roommate who's a Telugu, right? Who might not speak even the same language as you do. And, across the time, right, you will learn each other's languages, right? And you'll pick up words of each other's languages. So that actually creates, a nationalist tendency, right? That we're Indians and not any other, Punjabi or a Haryanvi or a, Bihari, etc. Right? Remember, at the end of the day, if you think about it, what is the purpose of all this, right? National unity, national integration. It is how, this all this helps in changing the lives of the oppressed and the deprived. Remember Gandhiji's talisman. Consolidation of the nation after independence had to be judged, right, in terms of how it affected their lives. Remember this fact, right? And still should be judged on that only. It is the people at the end of the day, and not some ivory tower that we are serving, said Nehru in one of his speeches. Uh, the idea is that the constitution laid for reduction of social disparity, and integration can only happen when we have the end of social disparity. We have the annihilation of caste in some ways. Remember, the momentum of the social reform was lost by the early 50s. Right? There was no struggle against the hierarchical caste system in India. Caste discrimination has an operation has continued even today, and casteism has just become a symbol of caste solidarity for electoral politics, right? There's no removal of social oppression, social discrimination, and exploitation based on caste, religion, language, and ethnicity, right? Gross economic inequality has remained and has just increased after 1991, right? I think maybe we should delete the word socialist from our preamble now, right? Considering what has happened in the last 25 years or so, right? Then we have something very interesting, right? As I've talked about, while discussing Kashmir, secularism, the test of Indian secularism is Kashmir, and is all the Muslims and the other religions is feeling safe in India, right? So that was basically very important, and the post the partition, very firmly we dealt with the communal violence. The RSS was even banned for a certain period, right? And so on. That also happened. And Sardar Patel was the one who actually banned RSS. So I think somehow BJP and RSS have forgotten that, or they don't want to tell you that. Okay. Nehru's growing stature as a world figure contributed to a sense of national pride in all sections of the people, right? And of all over the people, irrespective of the political alignment. People were very proud of Nehru. Okay, you might think Mr. Modi is doing something similar, but Mr. Modi actually is not in the same stature, or is not in the same level, I would say, as a diplomat. Remember, Nehru had stayed in jail for 3,500 days. That's 10 years. Uh, when we compare Nehru with any other Prime Minister of India, I think it is just being unfair to the comparison itself, right? Then the language problem. Now, this is the major topic that I think we've already covered this in a very different way. In the Ideas of India chapter, we have covered this to much more detail. So we'll be skimming through this rather than going into detail. So the language problem, right, was the most divisive in the first 20 years of independence struggle, right? It created the apprehension that the political and cultural unity of India was in danger. Linguistic identity was always a very strong force in societies, and was even more true for a multilingual society like India. The constitution recognized 16 languages at that time, and then now it recognizes a lot more. There are 22 as mentioned, right? There's Assamese, there's Bengali, there's Dongri. Okay, one thing I would like you to do, go through when these languages were added, what were the original languages in the constitution, then what were added in which amendment they were added, right? 21st, 71st, and 91st, typically. I think that would be a way of trying to remember them. Then there were basically two problems, right, which were there. First was the dispute over the official language, and the second was a reorganization of states. The reorganization of states we'll cover in the next lecture, but we'll now talk about the official language controversy. So the controversy was most virulent when it took form of opposition to Hindi and created a conflict between the Hindi-speaking and the non-Hindi-speaking people of the country. Now, before the independence in 1937, right, what was thought that Nehru said that our provincial languages are ancient languages with rich inherentness, right? Remember, we have classical languages with more than 1,000 years of history, and they have been spoken by millions of persons. They're tied up with the culture and life of the masses. And remember the fact that masses can only grow culturally and educationally through the medium of their own language, and therefore he said that it's in provincial languages that we should carry most of. And our system of education and public work must be based on provincial languages, right? So Nehru understood the importance of provincial languages. But remember, the official work of the government could not be carried in so many languages. Hence, the main issue that, let's say, if I want to apply for the Indian Civil Services, I have to speak in English, I have to work in English, right? It would be difficult if you write in any other language. So, but in the independence movement, uh, there was two sides of the debate. It was people were convinced that English would not continue to be the all India medium of communication in free India. But on the other hand, Gandhiji definitely talked about the fact that English is the language of international commerce. It is the language of diplomacy. It contains many a rich literary treasure and gives an introduction to Western thought and culture. So, despite it being unnatural and English has sapped the energy of our people and estranged India from Bharat, created brown babus, right? The criticism that way. The idea is that English could not be the prime language in India, right? And he also wrote that I love the English language in its own place, but I am its very invertebrate operant if it usurps a place it does not belong to, right? So basically, what Gandhi said was he basically wanted English to remain a second language, or the optional language. So now the question came, which language to take? Now we thought, like, let's it be Hindi or Hindustani, right? Now, in 1925 itself, the proceedings of the Congress, it was amended, the constitution of the Congress, that they should be done in Hindustani, right? English and any other provincial language may be used if the speaker was unable to speak Hindustani or wherever necessary. Then we have the Nehru report in 1928 and said that Hindustani written in Devanagari or Urdu would be the common language of India. And this basically became, interestingly, the stance after independence as well. But Hindustani was replaced by Hindi because Urdu was now a symbol of secession, right? And the Hindu champions, UP and Central India, they demanded Hindi in Devanagari script be written, right? Be made the national language. So the problem became is that this created a divide between the Hindi and the non-Hindi areas, and the case for Hindi basically rested on the fact it was the largest spoken language and as a written language. And it was understood in the urban areas of most northern India to Bengal to Punjab in Maharashtra and Gujarat, right? But the fear of South India was that it would create a disadvantage for them, especially in competition for appointment in government and public sector. They basically argued that the imposition of Hindi on non-Hindi areas would lead to their cultural, economic, social, and cultural domination. Okay, but the constitution, in after the heated debate, it said that Hindi in Devanagari script with international numerals would be India's official language, and English was supposed to continue in 1965. But after 65, Hindi was supposed to become the sole official language, but this basically led to a huge issue. And what also happened was that the Hindi proponents, instead of taking a slow, moderate approach to the gaining of acceptance of Hindi by non-Hindi areas, they relied more on imposition of Hindi through government action, right? Uh, Nehru himself told the parliament, he said that it is the way, right? It is the over enthusiasm which often irritates others and it as it irritates me. So this is the main issue that what Nehru was talking about. Now, the other problem which the Hindi the protagonists did was they basically tried to Sanskritize the language. Instead of replacing the commonly understood words with newly manufactured, unwieldy, little understood ones in the names of purity of language. Right? Nehru himself said that he could not understand it. The language in his own speech has been actually translated. Right? So that became the huge problem. Right? But despite that, Nehru and majority of Indian leaders remained committed to the transition, right, to Hindi as an official language. They believed that through the study, although the study of English was to be encouraged, English should not continue as India's official language forever. Sharp differences basically surfaced in from 1956 to 60, and there was basically a threat of disruptive tendencies. Right in 1956, the report of the Official Language Commission set up a constitutional provision that Hindi should progressively start replacing English as the various functions of the central government and effectively taking place in 1965. But two members from Tamil Nadu and West Bengal, Suniti Kumar Chatterjee and P. Subbarayan, they dissented, right? And basically, they said that the members of the commission suffered from a pro-Hindi bias, asking for continuation of English. Interestingly, both of them are actually supporters of the Hindi language, right? Okay, before independence. Uh, what happened was, the president issued an order in April 1960 that Hindi would become an official principal language, right? The president directive, basically the central government took a series of steps to promote Hindi. They sent up the Central Hindi Directorate, publication of standard works in Hindi or translation of Hindi, various books in Hindi, right? Compulsory training of central government employees in Hindi, translation of major texts of laws into Hindi, and promotion of Hindi, right, by the courts. Now, what happened was, with all this happening, what happened was everyone else thought that non-Hindi people, especially, he said that the Hindi speakers are supposed to profit immediately from this, if not from a long time and if not forever, right? So what C. Rajagopalacharya in 1958 said was basically the president of the Hindi Pracharni Sabha in the South. He declared Hindi is as much foreign to the non-Hindi speaking people as English is to protagonists of Hindi. Right, so that was the main thing. But Purushottam Das Tandon and Seth Govindas basically was accusing the Joint Parliamentary Committee of being pro-English. Okay, and they basically attacked Nehru and Maulana Azad for dragging their feet over the implementation of Hindi as official language. Then we have Dr. Loya's Samyukta Socialist Party in Jansangh, that is the BJP today, launched a militant movement and continued for 2 years for the immediate replacement of English by Hindi. Right, and one of the agitational methods was to deface English signboards of shops and other places. Right, now Nehru was in trouble. He didn't know what to do initially, but he realized the fact that Hindi extremism would actually strain the unity of a multicultural, multilingual country like India. He said that he gave an assurance in 7th of August 1959. He said, "I would have English as an alternate language as long as the people require it. I would leave the decision not to the Hindi speaking, right, knowing people, but to the non-Hindi knowing people." He also told the people of the South that if they do not want to learn Hindi, let them not learn Hindi. Right? And here, basically, he gave the first assurance, and that kind of created a lot more. People of the South were relaxed a bit. Official Language Act was passed in 1963, and Nehru declared the object of the act was to remove a restriction which had been placed in the constitution on the use of English after a certain date, that is 1965. Right, but in time Nehru died, and typically there were instructions given that the central government correspondence with the state should be in Hindi, right? Though the non-Hindi states would have a English translation be appended in that. Right. So Lal Bahadur Shastri was not as sensitive to the opinion of non-Hindi groups, right, when after Nehru died, and instead of taking effective steps for countering the fear, right, he basically declared he was considering Hindi an alternate medium in public service examination. And this basically meant that non-Hindi speakers would compete with all India services in English, and the Hindi speakers will have an advantage to use their mother tongue. Right, so this was something which became a huge political issue. Then the DMK, the Dravida Munnetra Kazargam, and C. Rajagopalacharya demanded that the constitution be amended and English be made the official language of India, in response. In 26 January 1965, fair psychosis gripped the non-Hindi areas, especially Tamil Nadu, and they created a strong anti-Hindi movement, right? And on 17 Jan, DMK organized Madras anti-Hindi conference, which gave the call for observing 26 January as a day of mourning. And they raised a slogan also: Hindi never, English ever. Now, personally, when I used to play nationals in chess and in other sports, whenever I used to use Tamil Nadu, despite the fact they knew Hindi, they never spoke it. They understood what I was saying, but they would only respond to English, right? It basically tells you that even today, right, people in South India have a fear psychosis of Hindi, and right, and this is not just in Tamil Nadu. This is also in other areas. Widespread rioting followed after this, right, and violence in the early weeks of February. Large-scale destruction of railway and other union property was done. So strong was this anti-Hindi feeling that, 4 students burned themselves to death against the official language policy. I think that is right. Two Tamil ministers, C. Subramaniam and Allegation, resigned from the union cabinet. Right. It was only Indira Gandhi who was basically, at the rush of agitation, rushed to South India, and she became the first northern leader to win the trust of the aggrieved Tamils, as well as the people of South in general. Right, because he supported them when this was happening, and for 2 months, there were 60 lives lost during police firings during the protest. Right. Finally, what happened was the Congress Working Committee announced a series of steps which were to form the basis of central enactment and led to a concession, and which led to the withdrawal of the Hindi agitation. After that, Lal Bahadur Shastri died, and Indira Gandhi became the prime minister, and basically, the South Indians were like now the anti-Hindi agitation was a little more relaxed now. Indira Gandhi amended the 1962 official bill, and this bill was adopted, and it gave legal fortification to Nehru's assurances of September 1957, 59 that is. And it provided the use of English as an official language, to Hindi for official work at the center, and that the communication between the center and non-Hindi states would continue in English as long as they wanted. Basically, they gave an indefinite veto to the question, and a virtual indefinite policy of bilingualism, which is working very beautifully even today, has been adopted. Right, we had I think if you remember, there was a certain issue when Hindi was used in various signboards in Bangalore, right, and this was also seen as cultural imperialism or Hindi imperialism by us North Indians, right? So remember this fact that language is very, very sacred to most people, and it should be very, very carefully done. Then the states basically were asked to adopt a three-language formula in which Hindi, right, the mother tongue and the English will be taught together, right? So that there's some kind of cultural assimilation. While in Hindi areas, a non-Hindi language, preferably a southern language, was to be taught as a compulsory subject, but this doesn't happen too much. What happened was Punjabi or Sanskrit being the language of which was taught, right? The government of India then took an important step of language question in July 67. There was a report of the Education Commission in 1966. It said the Indian language should become the medium of education, right? I wonder how they would teach science though, but uh, though the time frame for the changeover would be decided by Unity to basically. So basically, if you think about it, by 1967, right, in 10 years, the language problem had disappeared from the political scene. But basically, what it did was it gave the rise to the DMK, and they are still in power. If you think about in the states of Tamil Nadu, they have AIDMK and DMK, the two. Remember the DMK, AIDMK is from DMK only. In case you are not sure about that. Okay. Then what has happened? Let's try to look at that. So Hindi had made now in the last 50 years a rapid progress in non-Hindi areas through education, trade, tourism, films, radio, etc. Right? there's use of Hindi as an official language, though English is dominant, right? English as a second language has spread fast, including Hindi-speaking areas, right? The standards of spoken and written English actually have fallen if you think about, right? And it is the, now, if you think about our generation, we are not good in English, we are not good in Hindi, and I'm not sure we are good in Sanskrit as well. So what has happened is, instead of being good at least in two languages, what has happened, we are not good in either of them. There's more emphasis on science and technical education, I would say. uh, but if you think about the proof of rapid growth of Hindi and education, it's got to do with the Hindi channels. If you think about the Hindi TV channels today, there's so many Hindi TV channels and news channels also, right? That tells you that there's rapid growth in there. But on the other hand, English is not likely to survive. It is likely to thrive in India. It remains and would likely to remain the only medium of communication between the intelligentsia, a library language, and the second language of universities. Hindi basically has failed to perform any of these language. The ideal of making Hindi the linked language of the country remains, right? But they themselves basically pushed back the chances of Hindi becoming the prime language of India themselves. Okay. With that, we end this chapter, right? Okay. So in this chapter, I think you can write an essay and a question on cultural and diversity. There was a question which came in 2014-15 on religious regional diversity. Right. I'll post that as well. You can try writing that question. Right. Thank you so much. Right. With this, we end.